Karen?
Okay, yeah, it will go live just when you start, so all good. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Karen. So, good morning, everybody, and welcome to this meeting of the Audit, Risk and Assurance Committee on the 21st of May 2025. Everybody's most welcome to the meeting. It's lovely to see everyone on the screen. Do we have any apologies, Karen?
And we have apologies from Paul Eadie today. Katerina Casper will be joining us shortly, but so just Paul Eadie for the full meeting.
Okay, thank you. Can I just start by welcoming Pauline to her first meeting of ARAC? It's good to have you on the team, Pauline.
Thanks very much. Good to be here.
It's great to have you. Yeah. Are there any declarations of interest? Okay, then item 1.3 is the minutes of the meeting that was held on the 6th of February, and that's for approval, hopefully. Is everyone content that that's an accurate record of the meeting? Okay, thank you very much. Then we have the action log at item 1.4. There are 4 actions, all of which are proposed for closure. Everybody content with that? Great. And then finally, before we get into the substantive business, we need to decide whether or not we're comfortable to take items 6, 7, 8 and 9 in private. Is that okay with everybody? Great, thank you very much. In which case we're ready to go to item 2.1, which is the internal audit update, and we have Claire Robertson from BDO to present that report. Good morning, Claire.
Good morning. Can you hear me okay?
We can, thank you.
Okay. I'm sorry if you could bear with me for just 1 second. My computer's just closed down the tab I needed open.
It's guaranteed, isn't it?
Okay, sorry about that. So this progress report's in a slightly different format than you've seen previously, but hopefully is self-explanatory. It's just giving an update on internal audit activity against the plan since our last meeting. We've got 1 review currently in progress against the 25-26 plan. It's on management of recommendations, and there's 2 reviews where fieldwork is starting shortly, as well on health and safety and on overtime. So far this year, the plan is on track and there's nothing in particular to report.
Okay, thank you very much, Claire. Does anybody have any comments or questions? I mean, I do think the new format is really good, and I'm pleased to see that it's more focused and shorter than previous reports. I think the last report was about 80 pages, so this is a distinct improvement. Claire, thank you very much. Yes, now, Angela, so your hand first, I think, but marginally so.
Thank you, Mary, and yeah, well done, Claire. Just to say, I thought it was a really good report. In particular, I welcome the development of the PI dashboard. I know it's still a work in progress, but I think that will give us the opportunity to really ourselves drill into areas that we have a particular interest in, and but at the same time have that overview. I've used it in other settings, and it's a really powerful tool. So that's going to be a great development. One of the things I did want to ask was about the number of recommendations that are still to be implemented and still work in progress. And I've just been taking notes and I can't find them just now. What more could the board do, or the committee do, to support officers to really look at these recommendations and, I suppose, reconsider if there's ones that are going to be too long standing, that there are other mitigations that could be put in place in the short term?
I think as part of our follow-up work each quarter, whether there's other mitigations is something that we consider, and you will see that some end up being categorised as superseded, where we think that is the case. So they've not implemented it exactly as we suggested or the previous auditors suggested, but we're comfortable that the risk is being addressed. I think for the others, it's a matter of like prioritization. I think it's really difficult when organizations are responding to reports. They may not be aware of like other audits and assurance activity that's in progress, or other kind of business initiatives that also require attention. So that kind of management of resources and priorities is an ongoing and continual thing, and it can be difficult because people will be agreeing to timescales without maybe necessarily having all the knowledge of all the other competing priorities for those resources. So I think it's difficult. I think the committee is, in common with other organisations, like doing what it can to provide challenge and ask the questions over why there are outstanding recommendations, but it is just a difficult thing to manage, the constant reprioritisation.
So just on that, I just wonder how we might support that overview without it being too onerous, how we can support that overview so that the recommendations before they're agreed, the timescale is understood and they're pretty pragmatic in terms of the implementation. Is that something that we could consider in future?
It's definitely something that's worth asking questions about if you feel that they're not pragmatic. But I think the point I was making was more that they might seem pragmatic at the time, but then around the corner comes another thing that needs the same resources and it has an equal or similar priority. So it can be difficult when things are shifting like that.
But I suppose, sorry to labour this, Mary, but there is still a risk there in leaving it unattended, as it were, and without any action. So I'm just thinking that in terms of support for the organisation, maybe there is something that we need to do to say, right, okay, that was ideal at that point in time, but given we recognise that there's another priority that's come in, what else can we do that is maybe not just at that level? It's maybe something that the committee can think about in future, Mary.
Yes, I think that would be helpful, Angela. Before I come back to you, Pauline, John, you put your hand up on this point, and so did Lynn.
Yes, thank you, Chair. And Angela, to your question about what can we do as the authority, I think one of the resources we have is internal audits. We've said to look at this not just from the recommendations, but process. So they're doing fieldwork right now on management of recommendations. And that in itself is looking to answer some of the questions about what the barriers to discharging recommendations, what takes time, and hopefully answer some of the questions that you have about what could we do differently in future, and is there anything that Police Scotland could be doing differently from a process point of view. So looking forward to that, and we're expecting that to report in June. So for the next ARAC committee, there should be some answers, and I think gives you a bit of meat to talk about.
That sounds very timely, John. Thank you very much. You happy with that, Angela?
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, that's great.
Okay. Lynn, ACC Ratcliffe, you put your hand up. Welcome to the committee.
My apologies, Chair. I don't think it's
no. Sorry, it's
not at all.
It's the wrong one. It's DCC Beck Smith that's got a hand up. Apologies.
Thanks, Chair. Just on that point, it's a really good point, Angela, and I think probably fair to say previously we have accepted recommendations full stop in terms of timescale. I think organisationally we're getting better at understanding the impact of that on our staff and those that are doing the work, and we are, I think, probably helpfully better at having those conversations around managing the expectations in terms of what we can deliver around timescales. My sense is, going through the papers, that a lot of the older recommendations that we've moved on organisationally, and we're struggling to close those off because things have changed, or they're superseded by something else, or etc., or they're reliant on a partner agency doing their bit, and we are kind of working with them and chasing those. So I think, and actually was discussing this with ACC Ratcliffe this morning, I think there's something that we can do internally around those, around how we manage the recommendations better moving forward, but we're probably in a better position at pushing back in the first instance around timescales and making them more realistic. I think it's probably fair to say. So bear with us, I think, on that front, but welcome the support from the board in relation to that. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks very much. I think we're anxious to make this as sensible as possible. So that piece of work that's being done just now that John mentioned sounds really helpful. Now, next person was Pauline.
Yeah, thanks, Mary. Largely my comments and my questions have been covered by the previous conversation. It was about that management of the risk, particularly around those very high recommendations that have been outstanding for some time. And I think, as John said, the current review in terms of management of recommendations should hopefully give us a lot of pointers as to how we can make sure that there is appropriate mitigations in place if it's not the exact solution that we thought about some time ago. So I look forward to that audit report coming through in due course, and us taking on board any comments or suggestions. I've also seen in other organisations it's helpful to get an indication if the recommendation hasn't been completely discharged, but partially, because often recommendations cover a number of action areas, that, you know, there's some way of reporting that, you know, 40% or 50% has been covered, and these are the remaining areas, and these are why there are delays, and when we can expect revised timescales around them. So I hope that that type of consideration will be given in terms of the current audit that's underway. Thank you.
Thanks, Pauline. Okay, does anyone else want to come in on this item? I mean, I thought it was also worthwhile picking up at this point, Claire, the input that we got from BDO at our development day on the 1st of May. It was really very valuable. You gave us some inputs on new global internal auditing standards and current issues and trends. And we were grateful for your support for that day. So thank you very much for that. And thank you again for the new format of the report, which I think will be helpful moving forward. If there's nothing else on this item, then we're moving to item 2.2, which is the Police Scotland Audit and Improvement Recommendation Tracker for Q4. And this time is ACC Lynn Ratcliffe.
Morning, Chair. Good morning, members. To those that I've not had the pleasure of meeting before, temporary ACC Lynn Ratcliffe, I took over from ACC Stuart Houston a couple of weeks ago, so bear with me whilst I go through this report. And again, Chair, members, just thank you for being so gracious about the small mix-up that we had in terms of submission of this. The paper that we had presented originally was, or sent in originally, was absolutely relevant, but slightly outdated. So we're grateful for the opportunity to allow us to submit the updated paper to members and for discussion. So just to scene set a little bit, I will of course take the report as read, albeit in slightly tighter timescales than we planned, but just a reminder to committee that our audit management team focuses on the recommendation management and our readiness for assessment for inspections, and they help our business areas design improvements based on the findings and provide reassurance that these findings are being addressed. And they also ensure our organisational adaptability and preparedness for future scrutiny. As we've already touched on, our divisions and departments are encouraged to consider all other commitments when they prioritise new recommendations, which we do manage, as you know, along business as usual demands. And our audit management team provides support to do this. All delays, as you know, require approval, and recommendations are not discharged unless independently assessed and supported by evidence of impact. And we've got a governance structure in place across all levels of the organisation to ensure that appropriate scrutiny is given to making improvements. Our reporting has recently moved from a monthly to a quarterly basis to provide greater capacity for undertaking those detailed reviews of progress and providing practical assistance to the business areas to drive forward those improvements. So, as you know, this is an update for Q4 covering January to March 2025. There are 248 recommendations open across 53 individual publications, and that excludes the new internal audit reports that BDO present at this meeting. 46% of recommendations were added in the last year. That's the period from 1 April 2024 to 31 March 2025, and 76% of recommendations were made within the last 2 years. As slide 6 references, we closed 85 recommendations in the quarter. 79 were due during that period, and we met 35 or 41% of those on time. 37 were from previous periods or closed early, and another 13 that we will no longer track are explained also in the report. In relation to the closures, we've very briefly summarised some of the outcomes from the closures across those 28 publication areas. And as you know, we link all our recommendations to the joint strategy as well as the vision and the business plan to ensure that they remain in line with our organisational focus. And just to sort of draw attention to some of the work that's outlined in that slide, we've obviously done some work around hate crimes that are committed against our people. We now record and analyse those incidents to take action to protect safety and wellbeing, which is in line with our commitment around a thriving workforce. We've also improved the guidance and support to officers to submit better SPRs or standard prosecution reports, particularly around opportunities for diversion from prosecution, which are proportionate and person-centred, and that contributes to our safer communities strand, and also I would argue our supported victims as well, as outlined in the vision. And we've also reduced demand in policing and improved our collaboration with partners by giving BTP colleagues access to our vulnerable persons database, which is really important for sharing details of incidents as described within the mental health report, and it again contributes to that safer communities, supporting victims and creating a thriving workforce strand. As I've said, we are obliged to include the evidence of impact, as we don't achieve discharge from HMICS or BDO unless we're able to demonstrate the impact or the benefit or the risk mitigation. And this involves supplying performance information, statistics, findings from our surveys to evidence the so what, if you like, effect of the action and how that affects our performance. The report presented doesn't go into details of individual benefits, as those recommendations and that information can run to several pages. However, we have provided details of the other subcommittees, and in particular the Policing Performance Committee and BDO also hold detailed notes on how we've addressed the risks if any further information or specifics are sought. In terms of delays, there are 134 that have had delays. There's a slight error in the report which says 140, but it's marginally lower at 134. A small number of the risks are high, and more high-risk delays are reported under internal audit, where, again, as we've referenced, we've moved on as an organisation when we maybe at this point in time struggle to evidence the action that we've taken and how that has reduced the risk that's been identified. And I would just point out that although these recommendations are delayed, it doesn't mean that a significant amount of work hasn't already taken place to make the improvements and mitigate the risk. As shown on page 9, those recommendations are distributed across the organisation and not concentrated in any one business area. There are higher numbers in policing together, criminal justice, SCD major crime and public protection, and professionalism assurance. And I think that's probably reflective of where the scrutiny has been over the course of the last couple of years. And of the areas with the highest proportion of delays, we understand the reasons for these, which are typically interdependencies with larger or within larger improvement programmes, and occasionally ICT and partnership activity as well. 58 of those recommendations that are delayed were made prior to April 2023. And they represent our oldest open recommendations. And as again we've said before, the reason they remain open is because they've been more difficult to address and articulate, and in some occasions we need a little bit more time to discharge those. But in fact, some of those have been used as, to help design our vision and business plan, as we recognise those as pain points for the organisation. And I suppose what I'm trying to highlight is that although those remain open and they are older, they remain very small in numbers in comparison to those that we have addressed. The DCC professionalism, as outlined in the report, has instructed a further deep dive to ensure that recommendations which are over 2 years old remain in line with our published vision and business, and we will report on that deep dive to the Director of Strategy Analysis later on this month, and that will also include findings from the BDO internal audit. In relation to all the high-risk recommendations, we've included a summary of those at Appendix B, pages 13 to 14. And we've, as I said, highlighted which SPA committee they're reported at, and that links to any further information that members of the committee might find in relation to any of those specific risks. That's probably all I would want to say, Chair, and with slight indulgence, I'll refer to Donna, my colleague who's a bit of a subject matter expert in this regard. Donna, is there anything that I have missed or that you would like to add into that overview, please? Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Donna?
Thank you. No, I don't think there's anything further that I would like to add.
No, that was very comprehensive, Lynn. Thank you very much. I open it up for questions at this stage. We've obviously, we're lucky to have the HMICS Craig Naylor with us today, and some of the recommendations came from yourselves, Craig. Happy for you to make any contribution on any of the items, obviously. So if you want to come in, please do so.
Thanks, Chair. It was very comprehensive update, Lynn. Obviously, well prepared for your first meeting, so fantastic. I've got to say that Donna worked very closely with my team in managing the recommendations. And like yourself, you don't like seeing any recommendations sitting in the books for a long period of time. I'm very aware of Grant Craig's comments at the last ARAC meeting about maybe the performance being enough for a recommendation. And generally, we're very happy to look at that sort of approach when they commence on the pavement facility as a whole. But there are some, and following for particularly on the public report. Around the public recommendation, it's not 80%, it's all put a new system in place. Putting 80% of the work into the doing it, we're very good. And that's happened, but it's not as really good. So we see a really nuanced approach to both compliance issues, but also improvement issues. And improvement is very often the way that we can take a view on how much investment is going into something and follow as we want, or indeed whether there is a further investment. The compliance issues for me is one of them, not in the public policy. Is now 17 of the that is sorry, let me see if I can change the microphone. Hold on. Is that better?
Yes, that's better. Thank you.
Okay, apologies for that. So, I think what I was saying was there are certain aspects that will have to be 100% because of the compliance and implemental equipment, technology, or similar. There are others that we are very, very happy to work with Angela. I understand what the business is saying, but that requires the business to support and Donna and others to get the evidence to write it in a way that is to satisfy us. I'm very happy that we continue to do that. I think Donna and the team are coming in next month for you to have a discussion on how we can get that done. So,
okay.
That's here. I'm happy to say that the progress has been made and that.
Thank you very much. Yes, I think we're all now focused on making sure we can deal with the historic recommendations as quickly as possible, but without a disproportionate amount of effort, I think would be appropriate. Anyway, thank you, Craig. And Angela, you have got your hand up.
Thanks, Mary. Yeah, I had a couple of questions. I think some of them related to the more detailed paper that we had, but Donna, you mentioned the interdependencies that were sometimes leading to the delays, and we touched on that in the last item. In particular, there was a reference to some of the recommendations by Eilish Angelini on the child abuse area in particular. So my question is really about formal mechanisms, formal arrangements. I mean, the chart that you've got that shows the escalation process is really useful. But I wondered about where do these conversations take place at different levels throughout your own organisation and external organisations to escalate some of these recommendations that have been agreed externally but are perhaps being delayed because of a lack of acceptance by other partners. And I think it was a protocol, it was a procedure that I can't find it in the new paper, but it was a procedure that was being adopted, which I think has been through our own internal mechanisms, but hadn't been circulated or responded to by the Crown Officer, Procurator Fiscal Service. So that was one. And the other one was in relation to some of the outstanding issues on vetting. And I'm just thinking that in relation to some of the high profile issues that are going on just now, what more might we do to bring that forward? And what would that, are we at risk by not having the vetting up to date, and perhaps people haven't been able to access systems that, perhaps they don't have the authorization to access? Are we opening ourselves up to a risk there that we should quickly identify and close? Thank you.
Thanks, Angela. Lynn or Donna, either of you wish to come back?
Would you like me to come in on those, because I can answer those points?
Thanks, Donna.
Okay, so in relation to the recommendation around the forensic examinations for child abuse cases, and that is, we require some partnership working with the Crown Office, Procurator Fiscal Service. So our escalation routes are already up through our ACCs and DCCs who are engaging in those conversations, but it is quite a difficult and a sensitive area. So that is why things are taking so long. We do always look for alternative mitigations to put in place to manage the risk. And we have explored, there have been different pieces of work and technology explored in that area as well to support those risks. In relation to the vetting ones, that's in relation to the designated post review. So we have made quite a bit of progress with that. We've had additional staff in that area. We've had a concentrated and focused look on it. And on a lot of occasions, it's been more the resources from the vetting unit themselves are maybe not being used effectively because we're maybe over vetting in some cases, as opposed to always under vetting. So that work has now it's been accelerated. The work is coming towards a conclusion. I've had a look at it over the last few days, and it looks like we're going to be in a position to maybe close the HMICS recommendation from the vetting review. We might need to keep it open and for BDO because they will expect to see all posts having gone through that vetting process. But we've got a clear plan. We've maybe halfway through the organisation in terms of we have a designated post list, we've undertake priority vetting for certain groups, and we've got the rest of the organisation to get through. So it is hopeful that we'll be able to progress that. But we have governance and reporting at every level of the organisation. We've also just recently introduced divisional dashboards. So we're sending a dashboard every quarter to the director or the ACC, as well as the chief superintendents, just so that they can start to have a bit more of a focus and ask the questions of their own staff. If there's any delays, what can they do to help and support get those over? If there's no further action in relation to that, then we have the opportunity to escalate it further to our management boards, to the DCCs, and also if we're having difficulty pushing things forward across different areas of the organisation, we have the opportunity to raise it at our audit and risk board, and that's everybody's represented from the different business areas. And if we have problems that require a whole organisation response, that's the place where we would be able to resolve any differences and offer a degree of prioritisation as well.
Thank you, Donna. Is there anyone else who wants to come in? Any other questions? If not, we can move on to the next item on the agenda. Thank you very much for that. Item 2.3 is the improvement recommendations update from the SPA. John?
Thank you, Chair. Just some highlights from the report. We've made pretty good progress over the last quarter with discharging recommendations. We managed to close off 9 of our recommendations, so that's about nearly 40% of the recommendations that were outstanding. And the other point that I would highlight is the last slide in the pack, which gives you a brief update on the areas for development that were identified last year by HMICS and the inspection of the SPA. So against that, we've already closed off about half of the areas for development. And the table on that slide shows you the progress that we're making on the remaining half of the recommendations. So the table at the right shows you, for example, area for development number 2 is 75% complete so far. So that probably reflects back to the point that Pauline was making earlier. It gives you a sense of progress, because actually a majority of those are probably 3/4 of the way down the line. So we're quite satisfied with the progress that's been made and looking forward to the audit that's coming forward.
Yeah, thank you very much, John. I think you've preempted Pauline's question. Yep, but it's exactly, you know, the kind of helpful information we need. Things are not always complete, but they're pretty much there, and a wee bit more effort will get them over the line. That's great, thank you. Any questions or comments for John? Nope. Okay, thank you very much. Then we're moving on to item 3, which is internal and external audit reports. And at 3.1, we have 4 internal audit reports from BDO. Claire is here, obviously, to present these reports. And I see James Gray's on the line, and I understand Andrew Henry might be joining us as well in case there are questions for management on any of these reports. So the first one, well, hand over to you, Claire, for your report. Thank you.
Okay, so our first report is on estates management, and as part of this work, we looked at the development of the estates master plan, the maintenance arrangements, and also the action plan that management were implementing around health and safety recommendations raised from previous contractors and reviews that they'd had done. We found a lot of good practice as part of this review. So the estates master plan outlines a 10-year strategy to transform the Police Scotland estate to align with new policing models, and it aligns with the business plan with a focus on developing a sustainable, more modern estate that will support wellbeing and reduce long-term operating costs as well. There was a lot of consultation undertaken as part of the development of the estates master plan, which we've also highlighted as a good practice area. So overall, we've given moderate assurance for this audit, indicating that the controls are well designed and operating effectively. But we do still have some areas for improvement, which we've highlighted. There are 2 medium risk findings and 2 low risk findings. And the medium ones relate to our review of the master planning tool in use. I found a few small discrepancies in terms of calculation of costs and property data. So just minor reconciliation errors or properties identified as sold in one data set, but to be retained or fitted out in another data set. So we've raised a recommendation there, which management have accepted, to reconcile those and check some of those cost estimates again. We've also raised a medium risk finding around the next steps in the master plan. So at present, there isn't a detailed implementation plan that sets out specific timing and phasing for all of those properties that need to be disposed of, retained or refurbished. So the longer that situation carries on, there's more ongoing maintenance costs for deteriorating buildings, which are no longer required. So just flagging that, but it's already in development. The low risk findings relate to access to maintenance data. So a third party holds the master data, and what we found during the audit is that that was kind of limiting reporting ability, and also meant we couldn't get real-time access to data. And that's an issue that will affect management in terms of just getting information quickly, because they have to rely on the third party to provide it. And finally, we noted that the tools being used by consultants and management for scenario planning and cost modelling are on spreadsheets, which increases the risk of error and omission, and also doesn't allow for effective version control changes, audit trail of that. So we've recommended considering procuring a estates management system so that all this can be done in a more secure way. But overall, moderate assurance, so a positive opinion on the control environment in this area.
Okay, thank you, Claire. Does anyone have any comments or questions? James, you wanted to come in.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Welcome the report, and I, recognise the recommendations raised and in full agreement with them. The biggest issue that we have at the moment is around our data. We've never had an estates asset management system since the start of Police Scotland, and we have moved to, believe it or not, something as simple as just having a single national database, but it is on a spreadsheet. So we're in the process of procuring an estates asset management system. I have reflected that in my own certificate of assurance as part of the annual accounts work, and that's ultimately worked its way through to the accountable officer. So it's something we recognise. It's something that we put, I suppose, wraparound measures as we move forward and we get into more detail to make sure that there is accuracy, but it will be manual until we're able to get to that system perspective. But we are moving forward with it. And then there's still a bit of an issue, but as we move through the next number of months and we get into the estates team restructure, we will address the kind of silo working mentality that still goes all the way back to legacy forces, where teams still work on a geographic basis, and the different teams such as FM and compliance and projects not sharing information with one another as freely as they should. So we will address that, but that's one of the reasons why you can sometimes have slightly differing data sets, because that commonality of understanding hasn't been there. But as I say, we have moved to that national position. But overall, I think it's a fair reflection of where we are. And with regards to next steps, I mean, we are now out to tender to start to get into the more detailed planning work around the west, around Tayside, which were identified as priority areas in the overall master plan outline strategy. And we're hopefully moving forward to bring an OBC for the replacement of FETs over the next number of months. That's in late development now. So hopefully by the time we get to the end of the summer, we'll have more definition around what a plan looks like around the sequencing of full building upgrades, when the disposals will come through, and then when some of the major projects might start to be progressed. But that still needs more work done in partnership with the change function about those major projects as well, and sequencing of those to ensure that it fits with the overall organisation's change agenda. So recognise everything that's been raised, but we have got plans in place to address everything. Thank you. Thanks,
James. Angela.
So just to say, really welcome the report, and it's good to see that assurance given. And I know that James and the team did a lot of work in terms of the consultation. It did take some time to get the strategy in place, so that's great to see. Just one comment and one question. The estates management system sounds really sensible way forward. I just wondered, from my own experience, having standalone systems can sometimes lead to, more insularity and so on. And I thought it might be worth thinking about, and I'm sure IT have thought about this, links with other systems that are important, such as health and safety, and obviously links into the ledger and the financial systems. Which leads me into my question about the links with the strategy into more detailed planning on capital programming. It doesn't look as if the audit looked at that, but forgive me, I may have missed it. But I'm wondering, will that be, I'm hoping it will be quite a major feature of the implementation plan.
James.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. It absolutely will. It will obviously be something that iterates as we get better data, as we move forward through the months and through the years, when we're looking at overall of kind of 5 to 10 year capital programme here. So we have developed a 1 year capital programme for the current year, and we'll be able to get into the detail around that in the resources committee. So we are starting to be able to demonstrate that we've got, for example, 11 properties where we're looking to do upgrades this year, which are on the retaining upgrades, on the retaining upgrade list, that we're looking to hopefully towards the back end of this financial year start to maybe do some transactional activity in relation to the exit of FETs. So this is a kind of transition year, but over the course of the summer, as we look to put in place multi-year capital planning across the organisation, the estates will form part of that. Some of it in the outer years will probably still be more like placeholder type activity, but as we develop business cases as we go through the months and years and do the more detailed planning, we'll be able to replace that with more certainty and accuracy over numbers and timing. So absolutely, it needs to have that capital plan to demonstrate the delivery behind it, and it's something that, as I say, we'll iterate as we go. So as I say, at the moment, it's for 25-26, it's a transition year. It's quite rudimentary, but we'd hope by the time we get into 26-27 that we're able to demonstrate delivery in the context of a multi-year capital programme, and there's the visibility over how it fits in and how it's been prioritised. So yeah, definitely that's the approach we're taking.
Thanks, James. You okay with that, Angela? DCC Smith?
It was just a really good question, Angela, and a couple of points, if I may. So the first one is, in terms of the join up of systems, absolutely something that we want to be able to do, definitely moving forward. And I suppose the work of the transformation function over the last couple of months, building up the high level plan, my ask was to include everything across the organisation, so including the estates work, and James's team have been really helpful in feeding in kind of the current position and the plans, and we're making sure that's built in so we can understand what that looks like both financially and the impact of the interdependencies on the programmes of work that we've got in terms of transformation and how that will influence the estate's decisions in the future moving forward. So it's not been an easy task, as you might imagine, in terms of combining all of that, but so important to get one view across the organisation so we can see all of the impact of the various pieces of work. And Andrew's team in digital and data feeding into that in terms of what does that plan look like around influencing kind of the systems and the asks that we may come forward to around spend, etc., moving forward. So hopefully that gives you some reassurance that we are doing that in terms of the combined plan moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's it. Yeah, that's really helpful. Anybody else have any other questions on this particular audit before we move on to the next one? Nope. Okay, thank you very much. Second one then is on ICT controls.
Yeah, so this focused on IT change management control. So we looked at the policies and procedures around that, how changes are requested and prioritised, and management of and access to the IT development, test and production environments. We also covered quality and user acceptance testing processes, but also non-functional requirement testing, so things around compliance, security considerations, the kind of agility of the processes. We looked at agile practices, tools and technology, and also continuous improvement practices as well. The design of controls was assessed using various industry standards, and we found that the controls were aligned with good practice in most cases, which is reflected in our substantial assurance rating. It's a really mature control environment with only one low priority recommendation identified by our specialist digital team. The recommendation relates to non-functional requirement testing. We observed in our sample testing of both like emergency, new system change controls and routine change controls that non-functional requirements are being tested. However, the processes and standards for carrying out this testing have not been clearly defined. The absence of formalised processes for this could potentially lead to issues in compliance, security, usability, or the stability of the systems if there's peaks in demand. Management have already recognised this as an area for improvement and started with activities to enhance their approach in this area. So that there's also mitigations in place in that they consult with specialist stakeholders in the change review and approval process too. So those mitigations are reflected in the low priority rating we've given for this recommendation. Yeah, lots of good practice, and yeah, not much to say on this because there wasn't really that much identified.
That's the kind of audit report we like, Claire. That's good. I have to say it's very positive, and congratulations to the digital division for the work that they've done, and they can see that it has been recognised, so that's good. Are there any comments or questions? No? Okay, so we'll note that positive report. Thank you very much for that. The third report is on the grant management process. Not quite so positive, Claire.
Yeah, I think it's positive in that the processes in this area are moving in the right direction. I think the timing of the audit has meant that we've been able to provide moderate assurance that the newly designed controls and processes around grant management are well designed. However, we're not able to consistently demonstrate that they're embedded and consistently applied. So we can give assurance that once they are, that it will be a good control environment. However, at present, there's a lack of evidence around confirming compliance with procedure requirements like legal consultation, approvals in line with procedures, statements on compliance, and due diligence evidence. So there's kind of lots of room for improvement. There's also going to need to be training implemented and further awareness raising measures to support implementation of new processes and to improve what's already in place for grants that are already there. Some retrospective activity is going to be needed to make sure that those grants are subject to the revised checks and controls going forward in order to identify any risks and weaknesses with the arrangements there and address those going forward. So overall, moderate assurance over design at present and limited assurance over the operational effectiveness. But we recognise that in part that could be due to the timing of this audit.
Yes. So sorry, Claire.
I think that's it. I covered an overview, but if there's any areas you want me to go into more detail on, happy to do that. Just conscious we've got quite a few reports to go through today.
Thanks, Claire. Yes, James, your hand is up.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. And yeah, recognise that this is a disappointing internal audit report. I mean, in the context of looking at the follow-up across my entire portfolio, we had 7 recommendations live, and we've just picked up 6 here, 2 of which are high risk. Now, I think Claire's right. The timing of the audit meant that it was hard to give a higher level of assurance over the effectiveness of around the implementation of the new policy and procedures. And we put those new policies and procedures in place because we recognised that there was still some practice that wasn't where it should be. And it's positive in the sense that the view of the internal auditors is that the new arrangements that we've developed and we've had approved within Police Scotland through the Corporate Finance Board are seen as being, designed to a moderate level of assurance. The limited assurance over the effectiveness is disappointing, as I say, and I know in the testing much of the testing was done on the arrangements prior to the new policy and procedure, but I know of one that was done since the new policy and procedure came in, and it was an isolated case because I signed off on a payment because there was a charity that was going to have to lay off staff if they didn't get cash that day because they had run out of money. And it was an oversight on our part around processing it correctly. So I did retrospectively report that through Corporate Finance Board, but I understand why that exception arose. I think very quickly we will be able to demonstrate that we are entirely on top of this. And I think we put dates of October for implementing all of the recommendations there. And I can give you an assurance that I'll personally oversee that is done. And just for context, the amount of spend that we don't really award many grants, so that it's roughly about £600,000 a year, which represents a fraction of 0.1% of our expenditure. So it's of limited impact. But that said, of course, it is public money, and we need to make sure it's being managed effectively. So I'll give you that assurance. We'll get this addressed quickly. Thank you.
Thank you, James. I'm sure that assurance will be give the accountable officer some comfort. So, Lynn, you have your hand up.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yes, this was an area that we particularly wanted looked at. We realised there are issues there. As James has said, it's not a significant amount of money when you have a budget of 1.6 billion, but it is reputational and it does have an impact on those that receive the funding as well. And it is public money, and every pound counts, as we know. So we wanted this report done. It has proven what we suspected. And obviously, James has given a commitment that we will be moving forward on this. So I welcome the outcome rather than the limited assurance, the fact that we have a real sound independent basis for moving forward. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Lynn. Angela, your hand is up.
Yeah, thank you. And I welcome the report. It's really good. It's the purpose of audits, isn't it? Just to flag up where there's gaps and where we can improve. So that's great. I suppose I take the points about in the wider scheme of the budget, the total budget for Police Scotland, it's not significant. However, in other worlds, a grant fund of 600,000 is quite considerable. And I just wonder whether or not there is an opportunity to really look at this from a policy perspective. A fundamental review of why we provide grants, where we would get the most impact in terms of our priorities, and I suppose where are other public sector partners providing grant assistance, and our funding might be duplicating that. So it's a wee bit of a left field from this report, but it just sparked a thought in my head that there's maybe more to do in terms of how effectively is that. And I take your point, James, about a charity that's going to the wall. In other roles that I've got, I do see that quite a lot, but a more coordinated approach might help Police Scotland to think about where they could put that money, bigger sums perhaps, that would then really support the operational activity that they're engaged in. A comment more than anything.
Thanks, Angela. James, you wanted to come back in?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. And on that, I think now that we've put the new policy and the procedures in place, there will be that absolute visibility to the executive through the Corporate Finance Board, because they'll be asked to consider what's there. But on the broader point around the review, I mean, I can pull together a paper quite easily to explain the context of what we do. I mean, the single biggest area where grants are awarded is from the Violence Reduction Unit into partner organisations who employ people that have got lived experiences around violence that we would be able to employ because of our vetting regulations. So there's it's quite discrete areas. There's the Violence Reduction Unit. And then there's like one or two areas, such as £100,000 goes to Scottish Mountain Rescue, but we can provide visibility of that to you as a starting point, and then consider whether or not more work needs to be done, looking at the overall policy position. But in the interim, I can give you that assurance that every single grant is scrutinised by the executive, and there have been discussions amongst the chief and the deputies about whether we should, in fact, be continuing to run with some of these into the future. But for the most part, outside of the Violence Reduction Unit and the Scottish Mountain Rescue, the sums are in the 5, 10, 15, 20,000 for things like the Police Treatment Centre or the Scottish Police Memorial and things like that. But happy to provide more clarity over what that £600,000 is made up of.
That's fine, James. Thank you. It's just my lack of understanding. Thank you.
Thanks very much, James. Any other comments or questions? Nope. Okay, thank you very much. And I think, yeah, as you say, an audit that gives us some positive findings in a few areas where we need to pick up, but that's absolutely been recognised and is moving forward. James is saying everything should be completed by October, so that's good. Okay, final audit report from you today then, or in this session of the committee anyway, is the health and safety, transportation of dangerous goods. Claire, back to you.
Yes, so this is conducted in line with international kind of guidance on carriage of dangerous goods by road as best practice. So we use that as the benchmark. We interviewed production staff, local policing officers and road policing units, and observed storage practices at 3 criminal justice production stores, a local policing station and road policing. And as part of this, we also looked at the packaging and labelling of goods as well. What we didn't do is we didn't include forensics in this testing. And during our site visit of the Perth production store, there were 3 garages used to store productions where we couldn't access due to a pest infestation. So we didn't fully complete the sample review for that part of it, but we're still comfortable we got a good amount of sample testing done in order to form our conclusions. We have reached a limited assurance conclusion for the audit. We identified 3 high-risk findings and 4 medium. The high-risk ones are around policies and procedures for a specific dangerous good. They don't go into detail of how to safely transport and store different classes of goods. and policies and procedures for things like nitrous oxide don't cover long-term storage instructions, temperature control, transport frequency and disposal. And similarly for lithium-ion batteries, the expected practice has not been documented, and discussions with staff showed differing levels of understanding of what good practice looked like there. Whilst we're on site at one production store, we noted that there was 62 items that had unknown in their description. And also like risk assessments for chemical productions were out of date and hadn't been reviewed since 2018. And again, around particularly nitrous oxide and lithium ion, the don't state mitigating controls for long-term storage and frequency of transport either. During site visits, we did find around storage and disposal that there were instances of nitrous oxide being stored in a room without any ventilation, which is against the regulations. And at one store, a metal explosives box was being stored inside alongside other production goods, within which there were things that should be segregated because they heighten the risk to be stored together. We also found that there were kind of lithium ion batteries on e-bikes being stored in police stations against expected practice. And whilst disposal is managed by a third party, there are no disposal policies stating how to dispose of dangerous goods and the correct waste streams to use. So those are the higher risk findings. We've also raised medium risk findings around lack of training and knowledge of dangerous goods. Our interviews did find a lack of understanding with some about proper procedures there. We also noted that labelling practices in production stores didn't always agree with CDG requirements, as they didn't contain identifying numbers, hazard classes or packing group. And some shipments that we observed didn't have the correct hazard symbols. At a police station, there was a crate of fireworks that didn't carry any hazard symbols to show that the contents were explosive or contained dangerous gases. And again, we're linking that back to the high risk finding that there isn't a specific policy on how to label goods or what hazard symbols to use. We've also noted that whilst there is a reporting process in place for near misses and health and safety incidents, some log incidents have not really resulted in any kind of policy or wider learning amendments. So I don't think this process has been effective in meaning that any risks that identify won't recur or will be addressed effectively. So there's like an opportunity to better use the lessons learned process for organisational learning and effecting change. We also noted a review of one location. There was no means of securing items in the back of vans, and they weren't properly ventilated for transport of dangerous gases, but despite that, were being used for those purposes. So overall, there's several key deficiencies across the internal control environment in this area. We would highlight that we've conducted this audit because management were aware that this was an area that needed attention and improvement, and the audit has confirmed that. I think the root cause of these deficiencies is that there's minimal policies and procedures around transporting, storing and disposing of dangerous goods, and a lack of training in this area. So it has led to inconsistent and in some cases quite poor practice. And overall limited assurance on this area, and it is an area where some prioritisation is needed to make sure these health and safety concerns are addressed.
Thank you very much, Claire. I think we would agree with you that this does require to be prioritised, quite some serious issues. I think it's helpful to note that Police Scotland were aware of the issues and therefore asked for the audit, which is helpful. And I'm sure they're already working on the recommendations. But move to Pauline first with your question, Pauline.
Thanks, Mary, and thanks very much for the report. I too wanted to acknowledge that Police Scotland had asked for this report. I think that shows a level of organisational maturity, transparency, and real desire for improvement that is to be acknowledged. And also, I welcome management response in terms of the agreement of the actions and also the timescales for taking forward, particularly those high-risk recommendations. Claire, you also mentioned that whilst forensic wasn't covered by this, there were some issues, and I'll be looking for assurance from the wider team about how we make sure that forensics are aware of these recommendations and do indeed make arrangements to implement them with sufficient pace within their areas of responsibility. And also, I was wondering whether there were any wider learning points for how the organisation ensures compliance with wider health and safety legislation, and whether there's a process in place that's effective in giving assurance around that. Thank you.
Thank you for those questions, Pauline. Is there a volunteer to respond? Dawn, and we have Dawn and Craig, which you can choose who goes first. Okay, Dawn.
Thank you, Craig, and thank you for having me this morning to speak to this audit. Yes, it was something that was requested based on the what we had discovered in my team, particularly going out and doing their inspections and own internal audits, and found that these issues were arisen. And it came on the back of a paper that I had written as well, in terms of asking that perhaps we should get some external consultancy involved in this dangerous goods. However, what I can assure the committee is that there was an anticipation that this would be the result of this. And so what we've done is we've formulated two groups. One internally, that we will look at high-risk productions, looking at the action plan that we can now formulate from the BDO report. And we have got SPA involved in that as well. So even though they weren't part of that, they will be part of the group. We had sort of short life working groups initially, and everyone who had, so we had one for nitrous oxide and we had one for lithium ion batteries. We're now going to amalgamate those and use the action plan from the recommendations to take all of this forward. We've also established a similar group which includes our external partners. So, for example, the Crown Office are part of that, as well as the Scottish Courts and Tribunal Service, because we see that there is an end-to-end process that needs to be looked at here as well, because Police Scotland essentially take a lot of the organisational risk when they're holding on to a lot of these productions. That's been really helpful to start that conversation as well with our external partners. And we're hoping as well that along with that, the new sort of modernisation bill that's going through at the moment will also help in this space where we won't have to take on a lot of this organisational risk, because the digitisation of some of this, the evidential side of things, will improve that. However, that said, whilst we're still working towards that, we know we've got a lot of work to do, but I can assure the committee that I am going to make sure that those timescales are adhered, because it's a bit of a pet project of mine at the moment. So yeah, I'm looking forward to getting really, the action plan is already taking place at the moment. My team are working on that, and we've got meetings next week with both of those groups to start pulling this forward and pushing it forward. So yeah, looking forward to getting some real tangible actions out of it.
Thank you, Dawn. You happy with that, Pauline?
Dawn, can I just clarify, does that include forensics as well? So
yes, it does.
Taking forward the learning.
Yeah. So,
yeah, absolutely. They're a very important piece, particularly looking at how we test for some of these things and how we get it from one place to another, and all of that. So yeah, absolutely, they're pivotal to these conversations and these actions actually coming to fruition.
Thank you.
I can bring Craig in from forensics to confirm that, I think. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. Yes, it was just to confirm that Forensic Services have had sight of the report and are working with colleagues in Police Scotland. Because of our accredited management system, the storage of productions is key to how we go about our business and the risks that are involved in that. It can have an impact on other things, and we're very, very much aware of that from the scientific point of view, but we are fully engaged with colleagues in that matter.
Thank you, Craig.
Thanks, Chair. I guess my wider point was about what are the processes in place for ensuring that we are compliant with wider health and safety legislation? You mentioned, Dawn, that you and your team had been out and about and had raised concerns about this area, but are there any other areas, and are you content with the effectiveness of the processes you've got in place for picking those up?
Thank you. Yeah, sorry, I had written down that was a question. Apologies for that. Yes, we have got a lot of work to do in the space, but we're doing a lot of really good work in the background. Within my team, there is a policy development working group, and they have a tracker that they're going through at the moment, identifying the gaps that we have in relation to policy procedure, and we're prioritising those through these types of investigative work that we're doing internally. We also go through the policy passport, so it gets endorsed at Health and Safety Board and then through SPA People Committee. And once we have those policies and procedures in place, we've got a way of communicating that. We've done a lot of work on our intranet internally, and we involve a lot of our colleagues because we have local committees where my health and safety team are involved in those quite heavily. We're also about to embark on our own health and safety audit internally, so that should hopefully as well highlight anything that we might have to prioritise. But certainly in terms of learning, we've also got a learning development working group within my team who are again taking what we've got from the findings through investigation and internal audit that we do ourselves and formulating training around those areas that we need to highlight. So yeah, lots of work going on in the background, a lot of proactive work, but also there's a lot of business as usual going on as well as things happen. But yes, we've got a full timetable of things that we need to address, but we're working towards that quite quickly, hopefully.
Thank you.
Thanks, Pauline. Thank you, Dawn. Lynn, you wanted to come back in?
Thanks, Chair, and just very briefly for me to try and sort of operationalise the question there, which I think is a really pertinent one. I've just come from being DivCom at Greater Glasgow, and then for a period before that down at Argyll and Western Berkshire, so 4 years kind of in the operational space, and just for assurance in terms of that broader adherence to health and safety legislation. I think we would acknowledge, as we've discussed, that there are definitely some gaps there that Dawn and the team are very proactively addressing, but from an ops perspective, there's a real focus across all the business areas. Each division and each department has a health and safety operational lead. They chair a monthly meeting where they look at health and safety issues, they look at near misses. They're very, very well supported by Dawn and her team. And as I say, that goes across all the territorial divisions and all the specialist divisions, as colleagues at Forensics have highlighted. So it's not something that's just within that strategic management space. It very much decants down to actions and activity and scrutiny at a local level, and and across the divisions, each area commander who has responsibility for a number of offices is also very, very tuned into responsibilities from a health, safety, protection of officers and protection of those that are coming into our buildings perspective. So there is a very holistic approach, if you like, as there ought to be, to that health and safety legislative piece and translating that into actual activity on the ground, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think thank you very much for these comprehensive responses. I think that's given us a significant amount of comfort on this, and we'll be keeping an eye obviously on completion of the recommendations. Don, one thing you said I wanted to just go back to very briefly, which was that you had at some point recommended some external support on specific issues around dangerous goods. Is that something that you've been able to pursue, or is that no longer a priority for you? I'm just looking for comfort, I suppose, that in these areas where a dedicated resource or an external expertise would be helpful to you, that is available to you to look for that.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, so I think that part of the action plan from the recommendations and findings from the report may very well direct that, because there may be areas where we don't have that internal expertise, and that will be identified, I think, through the action plan. As part of the work that I did prior to the audit, we've already identified some external contacts that could potentially help us in this area. If needs be. I've also got members of my team who have stepped forward in relation to perhaps doing a little bit more of their own continuous professional development in this space, if we feel that that's necessary.
Okay, thank you. That's exactly what I think we needed to hear, so thank you very much. Are we ready to move on then? I think we've the 4 reports you've given us, Claire, have provoked lots of discussion and have been, as always, very useful. So thank you very much for those reports. We've got another couple coming up later on in the agenda, so we'll come back to you then. So moving to item 3.2 is the annual internal audit report. And we're back to you, Claire. So you're having a busy day today.
Sorry, just a slight lag in my computer here, but I'm almost there. So this report just kind of summarises the findings and conclusions reached on all of our work during the last financial year. You'll see from the report that there's a spread of kind of results. So we've got moderate, limited and substantial results across a range of areas and quite wide coverage in the year. We also kind of summarise what we've already told you around the work that we've conducted outside the audit plan, the results of the follow-up work that we've carried out, and also confirm adherence to our agreed performance indicators and turnaround times for reports and so on. So all that information is in there, but happy to take any questions. The key kind of part of this report is the kind of overall summary of what we've concluded in the year. And you'll see from this that in the majority of areas, so 7 out of 11 audits that we've performed, we were able to reach a positive conclusion on design of the internal controls. However, for 4 of them, further work was required to ensure robust control design. And on the operational effectiveness of internal controls in 5 of the areas, we were satisfied that the risk management control and governance arrangements in those areas were operating effectively. But for 6 areas, we were not able to provide reasonable assurance based on our testing that they were operating effectively. And again, that shouldn't be a surprise. It's summarising the results that we've reported during the year and giving an overall picture.
Okay, thank you, Claire. Any questions or comments? Angela.
So again, well done. It's really good to see that and all the work done so timeously and professionally. So thank you for that. I just wondered if there were any overarching themes that were emerging from the work this year that the committee might take into account in their future work.
I think perhaps one of the themes that goes through some of these is, I say there's 2. So one would be what I'd call maybe like central oversight and rollout of training and awareness raising of policies and procedures to make sure they're embedded throughout the organisation. So we spoke about that when we looked at the transportation of dangerous goods, but I guess also comes out in some of these other ones around grant management, around the equality human rights impact assessment. So that was definitely a theme that arose more than once. And the other, I think, would be like systems. I guess due to there being lots of different areas which require some investment in terms of systems, prioritising that effectively can be a challenge. And I think that in a number of areas, like we talked about for estates today, it's getting that kind of central one version of the truth, good quality data with which to base management decisions on would be something that could really kind of drive improvements. And again, we found that when we've looked in HR areas in the past as well as kind of finance and estates. So that would be another one that's a bit of a theme that's emerged. And again, in this year and in the previous year, we've looked at change projects and similar themes come out there. So we've evidenced improvement in terms of like prioritization and governance around that, but it'll be a continuing area of focus for internal audit, I would think.
Thank you, that's really useful to know. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bex?
Thanks, Chair. Just to offer some reassurance around that, the systems point is a really important one. And the conversations that I've been having around the plan is the sequencing of what we do and why and when. So I would like us to have much better joined up systems, utilise data more effectively. So I'm working with the teams in terms of what that looks like. We know as a consequence of legacy systems and processes, we've got over 500 systems currently within Police Scotland that we're using and we're supporting, and some of those are due to be out of licence, etc. So coming up with a really robust plan that shows what we are doing and how we are managing that in terms of upgrade is really important. And it's probably the first time we've done that across the organisation as opposed to within different silos. Hence my role in that and the importance of bringing all of that together. And for future briefing that in terms of how we manage that moving forward, we are bringing forward a front door effectively, which sounds really simple, but where people can come forward with ideas, thoughts, change initiatives, programmes, upgrades to systems, whatever it might be, and we will assess those based on the priorities that we've already got and whether they're something that we can take forward, whether something is already being in train around that, etc. We've never done that organisationally, and it's something that's been a real gap for us. So hopefully with that, and we will present that plan to you on the 11th and at Resources Committee at a high level as well. So you hopefully will have some assurance around that. It's not going to be something that we'll fix overnight, but I think it's really important that we've got a plan to understand how we move forward with the digital and data landscape particularly. So thanks for raising.
Thank
Sounds
you.
really good, thank you.
Thanks very much. Could I maybe just ask Claire, in 4 of the audits that you did, you weren't able to give us reasonable assurance, but only limited assurance. Could you say a wee bit about what that means in this context?
So I guess within our opinions, substantial is really where we find that your practice aligns with good practice in the main, but there's some really minor areas where improvements could be made. Moderate is almost where we're saying in the main controls are well designed and operate effectively. However, there's opportunities for further development of the controls. Limited is where there are some areas where controls are operating well, but there's some areas where we can't really say that, where further work's needed to make sure you're comfortable with the level of risk you're carrying in this area. So I guess when we're looking at the overall picture, we are finding that there's quite a few areas where we are uncomfortable with the level of risk being carried. And I think in some of these areas, they are kind of flagged to us as areas where we think there might be too much risk, where there is improvement needed. And that's why we're getting this spread. Some of these have been flagged to us as areas where management are aware that there needs to be improvements. But we would like to see the overall conclusions reaching a more positive state with some of the implementation of the recommendations we've made being carried forward.
Yeah, I'm sure we'd all like to see that, Claire, and you know, I'm comforted by some of the commitments we've had today on that respect, in that respect. So that's helpful. But yeah, okay, thank you very much. That's useful. Does anyone else have anything else they want to ask about the annual report? Nope. In which case, moving to section 4 of the report on assurance reporting. Our first item under section 4 is the HMICS scrutiny plan, and we have Mr. Naylor with us today to speak to that plan. So over to you.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning, everyone, once again. If you don't mind, I'm going to share my screen and just run through a few bits and pieces just to have something to talk to. So hopefully you can see that. Can you see that now? Yes, we can. Excellent. So this is very much a fairly generic pack of what we do. So you will all be aware of this. So I won't dwell on it too much. Our body has been in existence since 1857. Thankfully, I've not held the role the whole time, but since 2012, we were re-established under the Police and Fire Reform Act. We can and do inspect Police Scotland, the SPA, SPA Forensics, but also any other policing body acting within Scotland, including BTP, Civil Nuclear Constabulary, and the National Crime Agency. We are focused on the state efficiency and effectiveness of policing in Scotland, and we are independent from Scottish Government and the authority. Functions of us, we can and are occasionally tasked by ministers, and we are to look at the arrangements made by the authority and Chief Constable under section 37(1) and 2 of the Act. That slide is very much what we've gone through over the last sort of year to try and establish a new scrutiny plan for the next 3 years. It's very much a repetition of what we did 3.5 years ago just now to come up with our first 3-year plan, and you'll not be surprised by much of that, so I won't go into too much more detail. So what have we done since 2022? Well, quite a lot. A large number of reports, many of which we've talked about at either this committee or other places. The ones that are constant and keep running with other partners, like the Children at Risk of Harm, Adult Support and Protection, and Healthcare and Custody, are the sort of common battle rhythm we do every year. But everything above that has been defined on risk and then has been inspected. What are we currently committed to? We are currently working on drug harm reduction. We're doing field work at the moment. We're currently working with the prosecution inspector, looking at citing of witnesses and the whole criminal justice process. And we're looking at tools of the trade, so the equipment provided to officers and staff on the front line to deliver the service they're doing. We're also looking at police officer and staff conduct and discipline. And you'll be aware, and I'm sure we'll touch on this later on, we're doing the best value of policing. We've got a briefing tomorrow afternoon on that. We will be working on a crime audit, which will start later this year. And one of the things that we're very, very aware of is police data in Scotland is still recognised nationally in the UK as accredited national statistics. We want to make sure that we can work with Police Scotland to look at that and hopefully give a clean bill of health. That is very different to the position we currently see in England and Wales, where police statistics are not nationally accredited. Going into our scrutiny planning, there's a lot of intelligence we gather on various different areas, but what we saw as the big ticket items are the budget, which you'll not be surprised about, the public sector reform and a lack of pace in justice reform across Scotland, public trust and confidence, particularly things like the Sarah Everard conviction of David Carrick, the shooting of Chris Cabba and the issues that have come out about that, and then also the increasing online and cyber-enabled crime and the massive growth in the fraud space. We now recognise, as to the service, that the traditional crime is majorly influenced by digital and cyber capability. That puts a pressure on the front line, and recruitment, retention and progression is impacted by changes to pension legislation and obviously things like pay progression as things move forward. So What are we going to do over the next 3 years? These are, the first ones we'll look at our thematic reviews, so deep dives into thematic areas. So we're going to look at policing in a cyber world. So how well is Police Scotland established around cyber, around cyber crime, but also ensuring that its capability and capacity is built to tackle this threat. We're going to follow up on the domestic abuse work we did in our first 3-year plan to very much focus on are the recommendations being met, but also where staff are either, officers and staff are either the perpetrator or the victim in this space. How is that dealt with? How is it managed? It's a high risk area of business and one that we want to make sure that we're covering effectively. We're going to look at violence, including violence against women and girls. How are the strategies that are being put in place being delivered? How are complementary organisations like the Scottish Violence Reduction Unit playing a part in that? And how do we work across relationships with all the local authorities, health boards, etc., to make sure that we are preventing and tackling it when it does happen? We want to look at major crime investigation. One of the things that Serene Livingston used to talk about regularly was there were no unsolved murders in Scotland since the creation of Police Scotland. I think that's still the case, but obviously that moves with time. And one of the things we want to look at is the consideration of historical and unresolved major crimes. Much of that is a very hard area to look at, and one that Police Scotland seems to do quite well, but we want to pull the lessons from that and consider if it is a gold-plated standard when everything else is being challenged budget-wise. The Chief Constable is committed to policing in the local community, and we want to have a look at that. We have seen recently reports from Scottish Government on antisocial behaviour, and that is a challenging area for all local authorities and puts a significant demand on the front line. So we want to make sure that that has been done well, that the legislation is being followed, and that there are strong recommendations coming out of that to make sure that the new model of policing that is coming towards us is one that fits the challenges that are being seen on the ground. We want to look at operational support. We did drug policing last year. We also want to look at armed policing and the cultural issues within the specialist resource. Air support, dogs and horses are also expensive resources and I'll be using them to good effect. So we'll be having a look at that. And then we'll take a dive into policing serious organised crime, an area that Police Scotland has done exceptionally well, particularly since Operation Venetic. The partnership with my old place of work with the National Crime Agency is a very strong one. And we were speaking about that last night with NCA colleagues, and I know that the Director General will speak to you tomorrow at the SPA board meeting about the approach to tackling serious organised crime. But is Scotland doing as it should do, and is it meeting the expectation nationally and delivering for communities across Scotland? The final part of thematic reviews is investigation of child abuse. We previously did work on online child sex abuse issues, but we want to have a look at wider aspects, particularly about children who are being exploited in communities and how does this fit within what Police Scotland are doing. We also do, as I say, audit and assurance reviews. We're going to look at the crime audit, as I mentioned earlier, the sex offender policing unit, 7,000 registered offenders and no sign of that decreasing or slowing down in its growth. Are Police Scotland managing this risk effectively? I know there's a lot done by Bex in her previous role to try and manage that more effectively and to ensure that the risks that are posed by offenders in communities are dealt with proportionately and to mitigate and minimise risk to further offending and for those communities to make sure that people are kept safe. Policing together, we've seen the announcement by Sir Ian about 2 years ago just now that the organisation was institutionally discriminatory and racist. Policing Together has been running now for probably about 3.5, 4 years. So where has it got to, and when will we know that the organisation is moving into a better position to say that it's no longer institutionally discriminatory? We'll also look at change and transformation, and it picks up on some of the points that Claire was making in some of the audits that they've done about particularly benefits realisation and how are these processes run? Do we recognise that the investment is being met with a suitable benefit return on it? Training and development, always a challenge. Probationer training has been looked at previously. We want to go back and revisit that. And we also want to look at the implementation of legislative change. You know, one of the things that we have picked up on recently is there is often not a realisation of the cost of change of legislation to the service. And we want to make sure that the process taken to understand, work with Scottish Government colleagues and look at the cost of change of a piece of legislation. For example, around dangerous dogs, that has been far more expensive than was submitted to the parliamentary scrutiny under the financial memorandum that was submitted. So we want to make sure that Police Scotland takes full consideration, as does the SPA, of the cost of new legislation. Keeping going, Chair, we will also be doing collaborative reviews. I've mentioned some of these, so I won't go through them again, but this is a core part of our business, which we will continue to do. But we are doing work across scrutiny bodies across Scotland, with Audit Scotland and with other partners to consider, is there a more CRERAR-friendly approach to things like children at risk of harm, adult sport and protection, and the wider public protection agenda. That piece of work is feeding into a group that I chair that is supporting the National Public Protection Leadership Group. And we hope to have recommendations to that group in probably January of next year for then consideration across government and partners about how we might do things differently in the future. We are going to look at the Commonwealth Games. I'm not going to go into the detail of that because we're still working on what that will look like, but we want to give some limited assurance along with the internal audit about the aspects of that. So we need to have conversations about who's going to do what so that we don't step on each other's toes and just make sure that we're providing the best comfort to the SPA that we can on that. And that, Chair, is pretty much the two wheels of this year and then the next 2 years of what we're going to cover. And I'm very happy to take some questions.
Thank you very much, Craig. That was very interesting indeed. Can I open it up for questions? Comments? Pauline. And then Angela.
Thanks very much, Craig. Really helpful. I was just wondering about some of those reviews that HMICS does on its own, but impact way beyond Police Scotland or the SPA, and how you connect with those other organisations so that we can kind of try to get the end-to-end learning and continuous improvement. So, for example, you spoke about cyber as one of the areas that you're going to particularly focus on this year. I was also thinking about wider criminal justice reform, etc., that I'm sure you'll get into over the 3 years.
Yeah, it's a very good point. And where we can, we try and do whole system approach. So the work we're doing on citations just now with the Prosecution Inspectorate I think, will bear significant fruit in terms of both what is the responsibility of Police Scotland around citations, but also what is the improvements that can be made in the Crown and elsewhere in the organisations to streamline, reduce the demand placed on Police Scotland, and if at all possible, stop police officers having to act as post persons to deliver citations. Massive piece of work. 49% of citations currently are delivered by Police Scotland officers and staff. That's totally inappropriate. When you look at the legislation provides an ability to send these electronically by email, text or other messaging, and that's not been taken forward. The difficulty we've got is there is no scrutiny body for the Scottish Courts and Tribunal Service. The chair, who's the Lord President, is the one who has got responsibility for that delivery. And I think there is a lack of a joined up scrutiny capability in that space. I've called that out 2 or 3 times now in annual reports, but so far I have had no way of influencing that debate any further. Where we see pieces of work that join up with other bits, so policing in the cyber world, I was speaking to James Babbage last night, who's the Director General in charge of cyber within the NCA, and we will be speaking with them when we do our inspection work. So it's not just about how Police Scotland delivers it, but how do they join up with national capabilities, including with the NPCC colleagues down south. So while not doing a joint piece of work with HMIC FRS, because I want to focus on Scotland, we will make sure that we touch into the areas where we can make a difference. Hopefully that answers your question. Thank you.
Thanks, Pauline. Angela.
Thank you, and thanks, Craig. It's a really good report and a really good read. Such an interesting range of areas that you're going to tackle, and we'll look forward to seeing the reports coming up. I was just to say I was really pleased in it just to see just the amount of engagement that had taken place to get to the stage that you've got, and I think that's evident in the range of topics that you're proposing to pick up and bring forward. So thank you. A couple of points, and again another one just throughout it, you dot the fact that you'll be working with partners, other scrutiny agencies and bodies across Scotland, which I think will again enhance the reports that we get. Just to flag as well, in addition to the work that you're doing with Audit Scotland on the best value audit, and you'll probably be aware of this, there is quite a lot on underway or planned on the children and young people that might be of relevance to some of the audits that you've got in the report. So as you work through this particular programme with colleagues from Audit Scotland, you might pick up on that, but it would be worth exploring that further if your team don't know about it just yet. The other point that I was just going to mention was the managing offenders, and having come from a local authority background, this was always something that was taken really seriously. It was a real priority, reintegration back into community, keeping the individual safe as well as the community safe. I am conscious, and you'll have heard this from colleagues in local government, Craig, that the housing crisis is creating more and more of a pressure on this particular client group, and it may be worth, without me going into all the detail, it may be worth just picking up on that in particular. I suppose for me, I am a bit concerned about the subsequent the risk of homelessness and the risks to the individual and communities as a result. And my final point was Forensic Services had a really useful seminar last week that had Police Scotland and other partners there on a knowledge exchange, really looking at where how do they build up data, evidence, how do they work with others when they're building up their forensic profiling of cases. And there were links, a lot of links in there between cyber, police arrangements as far as cyber is concerned, but also the links with the more physical elements that forensic science undertake. So I just wondered whether or not you were going to touch at all on that side of it as you went through your cyber work. It may be too early to say, but again, it's possibly just worth flagging.
Thank you for that. I'll try and touch on each of your points. I sit on the Strategic Scrutiny Network for Scotland with Audit Scotland colleagues. It's currently chaired by Alison Cummings. So we're very involved in some of the work we're trying to do around place-based approach. And again, look at that in a slightly different aspect. In terms of the sex offender and homelessness, it's absolutely huge. But this isn't a new issue. This is something we've been wrestling with as long as I can remember, about MAPA arrangements and how do we make sure that suitable housing is provided for those who are coming out of prison on some form of restriction or order. Having good relationships between local authorities, policing, prison service to ensure that the aftercare is something that is well considered before, in fact, very well before someone comes out back into the community, is something we'll be looking at. And finally, the forensics knowledge exchange, I don't think we could attend, just we were stretched in other ways. But one of the things that is I am acutely aware of is the positioning of digital forensics within Police Scotland rather than sitting as part of SPA forensics. And I know that's been a debate, in fact, going back to the creation of Police Scotland and the SPA, should digital forensics sit within the SPA forensics, or should it sit within Police Scotland? It currently sits within Police Scotland. I have a nervousness about that in terms of separation of the forensic analysis from the operational side of things. But to be honest, at the moment, I don't think we can show enough evidence of the current practices and how they're working since things have moved on following the cyber kiosk debate a number of years ago. So yes, it's something we're very alive to, and something that we will probably feature in that inspection.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Katharina.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Mike Craig, for the report. Just to echo what colleagues have already said, very good report, very interesting read, and really welcome the broad engagement that went into actually creating this. So really, really interesting. And you cover a whole set of very relevant, very important topics. It's so they're all the big public interest items, I think, that are there, and it seems ambitious. So I suppose, I've got, and I'm very, very cognizant of the fact that we very much rely, obviously, as an authority on the reports that your function produces, because you've got the resources to go in depth and really, particularly with a lot of your audit and assurance reviews. I mean, the depth that you go into is just is absolutely second to none. And so for us, it's a really, really important triangulation point and assurance insights. So I am very interested in understanding. You've got a number, as I say, you've got a number of really big items here for the next few years. So in terms of the timing, I'm also quite conscious that some of the areas that you're looking at, there is a lot of change happening there just now. So things are, I suppose, in a state of flux, and you said it yourself, like, particularly if we look at policing together, which has been ongoing for a while now. So I suppose my questions to you are, firstly, it is an ambitious agenda to, and to what degree do you think you have got the necessary resources to deliver on this? And then secondly, in terms of timing, how do you manage that so that, when within the next few years, when you do touch on those really important themes, that you do it at a point in time, I suppose, when it's gives you the maximum benefit in terms of the change within Police Scotland in those areas?
Some really interesting points, and thank you both for your comments about our engagement. One of the things that we did want to do was to widen who we spoke to, and we did that, including I gave evidence to the Scottish Youth Parliament at Holyrood, which was absolutely terrifying. These 16 to 24-year-olds holding us to account. Absolutely fantastic experience, but very, very good. In terms of our ambition, we are a small team. I've only got 14 full-time staff, and we've got another sort of 15 or 16 people who come in and join us for various different pieces of work. This programme of work is smaller than our previous programme of work. In the last 3 years since I started, we have become better at understanding how long it takes, the resource it takes, and the cost of that. So we have streamlined what we were planning to do based on that knowledge that we've built up over the last 3 years. I'm not saying we will complete all of these by March 2028, but if we haven't completed them, I expect to be well into them. The final 4 or 5 will be established and up and running by the time 31st of March comes round in 2028. So yes, it's challenging. Yes, it's ambitious. Yes, it is based on the widest trawl we've ever done of the public, stakeholders, partners, and the service itself, including a lot of people who wrote into us either by email or filled in our survey to give us their views of the things they thought would be of value. The one area that I was disappointed in the response was we wrote to every elected member in Scotland, either MPs or MSPs, and we had 3 responses, which for 100 and something MSPs and 59, I think it is, MPs, I thought that was disappointing. I've given Audrey Nicholl, the chair of the Justice Committee, that feedback. She was one of the 3 that did respond to us, and I was delighted to meet with her and have a long conversation about it. But no, we are ambitious. We want to be operating in a space that improves policing across Scotland, and we want to be in a position that the evidence we provide and the recommendations we make are considered to be relevant, to be valid, and to be things that can be taken on without overwhelming the organisation, because we know there's a lot going on, we know there's a lot of change. What we want to do is to add to that change and make it more worthwhile, rather than putting tripwires or impediments in the way.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Any other comments or questions? I think, Craig, it's fair to say with this programme, you're not going to be wearying over the next 3 years. You've got an awful lot on your plate, but I know how hard your team work, and we always look forward to working with you and your team on these matters. So thank you very much for coming along today, giving us that presentation and sharing your scrutiny plan with us. And we look forward to the next 2 or 3 years of hard work to take forward what are quite clearly really important critical issues. So thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, moving on then, another important matter, best value update from Police Scotland, and that would be Patrick Brown.
Good morning, Chair. Good morning, members.
Morning, Patrick.
Good morning. Good to see you all. So we've just provided a very kind of brief paper on where we are at in our preparations for best value. As you are all aware, on the 9th of May, the Auditor General and Mr Naylor, the Chief Inspector, published the scope of the best value audit around policing, focusing on 5 statements around: does policing have a clear strategic direction? How effectively are resources used to deliver policing? How effective is policing's partnership working? How well is policing performing, and is there evidence of continuous improvement in policing? Obviously, this scope came out on the 9th of May, but our preparations for the audit began quite a while ago, focused around the 8 themes which are in the best value guidance. So our preparations have been well underway. I think you're all familiar with the process that we adopted, that we have set out in the opening section of the paper, paragraphs 1.1 to 1.7. I thought it was just useful to give you a bit of a feel for where we are now at. In section 1.8, we've highlighted to date that we've got over 500 pieces of evidence that has been submitted from various parts of Police Scotland in support of our self-assessment. This really does demonstrate the scale and the complexity of our organisation. Many examples that I could give in terms of the evidence that's been submitted that supports the self-assessment, whether it is our vision that we've set, and we've a kind of strong vision, a strong business plan kind of going forward, as well as the various partnership agreements between COSLA, between ourselves, Police Scotland and the authority, that really highlights the importance of collaboration across the public sector with our communities as well. The Best Value team have reviewed all this evidence which contributed to the self-assessment, and all of these documents are now there and ready for submission to the inspecting bodies following, as Mr Naylor has already said, the briefing that we are having tomorrow afternoon. The findings of our self-assessment really do highlight the historical key best value successes which have been met against the original outline business case for police reform. It has demonstrated a culture of continuous improvement, but one which we can always improve on. But it has allowed us to evolve and be agile to ensure that we're maintaining a strong policing service in Scotland. And that has really been set and demonstrated through our revised Vision 2030, which has set the direction for a revised model of policing going forward. As ever, through any self-assessment, we are never a finished product. We have identified a number of areas for improvement, which we will discuss with the audit teams through the process of the audit. And Mr Naylor, in his presentation just done, has actually highlighted a few of those kind of areas. For example, within benefits realisation, which we're all aware has been a challenge for Police Scotland in recent years. And we do recognise that as a significant area for improvement. But we really welcome the audit. We're looking forward to the engagement tomorrow afternoon with the inspecting teams. Interviews, etc. are all set up. Our self-assessment has been submitted and I know has already taken an initial review by the audit teams, and we look forward to engaging through this process as we go. The most important thing, though, to highlight is although this paper is focused on the immediate process facing us, work does continue about how we ensure that we embed best value and continue to embed that in all the work that we do kind of going forward, particularly as part of our Vision 2030. And hopefully I'll be able to kind of update progress on that at a future ARAC as well. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Patrick. Yes, we've had regular reports on best value preparedness now for over a year, I think, and that's been very helpful from Alistair and from his colleagues as well. So we've been very clear that one of our priorities is to help ensure that there are adequate arrangements to secure best value in advance of the audit, which we've been anticipating now for a wee while, and it's about to happen. So that's been a priority for the committee, and I know for yourselves. We had a really helpful update from you at our development day on the 1st of May, and that brought us up to speed on the preparations and the completion of the self-assessment. All of that has been well received, and now you have the kick-off meeting only tomorrow, as early as tomorrow. So we really are now off the starting blocks, I think. So thank you for the presentation today, Patrick, but I'm happy to open it up to questions from members of the committee. As I say, it's off. Oh, sorry, Angela.
It's not so much a question, Mary, it's just to say, it's all systems go now for the audit, so I'm sure there's a lot of work, but I think self-awareness is the key, and I think from what we've heard, there is significant self-awareness of what's going well and the areas that you continue to improve upon. And I wouldn't beat yourself up about benefits realisation, because in my experience, it's notoriously difficult. So I think that some assistance from colleagues out with the organisation will help us all. So thanks, and yeah, we look forward to seeing the finished product.
Yes, as always, Angela, good advice. I think we could get bogged down in benefits realisation. We're not going to solve it before tomorrow afternoon, so we just have to keep it as a work in progress. And I think, as Angela's highlighted, take advice from those who maybe are a wee bit further down that road than we are. So yeah, I think wish you well tomorrow. Hopefully the feedback that you get tomorrow is helpful, or the information that you receive is helpful, and this committee will continue to support the work that's being done and to provide whatever support that we can. We're all looking forward to being interviewed. Well, maybe not looking forward to it, but preparing for it. And we're right behind you. Okay, so good luck. Angela, you still got your hand up. Did you have something else you wanted to say? No. Okay. Okay, then thank you very much for that, Patrick. And item 4.3 is a similar update from SPA and Forensics, and I think that's John.
Thank you, Chair. Starting with just SPA Corporate itself. So this is the third year now that we've done our annual self-assessment of best value. And I think reflecting, we've come a long way in those 3 years. What we're effectively showing in front of you is we're 92% fully compliant with all the indicators, and that's huge progress over that period. A large part of that really also reflects on the HMICS inspection from last year, which was incredibly favourable and helped us out a lot in making those last steps. So that paper in the summary shows you where we've come. And I think on reflection now going forward, we're looking forward to seeing the audit work which happens, and then probably thinking again about what we do with this process going forward so that we're continuously improving. For forensic services, no further update to give at this point. They provided the best value assessment to yourselves in February, so really we're all ready to go. And as Patrick said before, we've also provided our self-assessments for forensics and SPA Corporate to HMICS and Audit Scotland. And lastly, just in terms of that audit, most of it's been covered, but just for public reporting to the ARAC, we've included the audit scope within this agenda, and we've talked about the next steps for the audit. So we'll be expecting updates to come to you in the next ARAC committee with some initial findings, and then making arrangements for where we take the report going forward in the future.
Yes, yeah, thank you very much, John. That's really helpful. And I do think that we often tell our youngsters that the prelim is as important as the exam. So we can thank Craig for having set our prelim exam last year, because the preparation for that and the work that we did then has undoubtedly helped us to get off the blocks this time round. So thank you for that, and good luck to everybody who's going to be involved in the interviews and the whole process that's about to start. So if we've nothing else that we want to pick up at this point on best value, we can move to sorry.
The Chief Executive would like.
Apologies, Lynn. I didn't notice your hand up. You're way up in the corner of the screen, and I totally missed it. Apologies.
In the corner and in the dark, but I looked a bit. Apologies, Chair. I just want to add maybe two things. First of all, you touched on it yourself, the focus of the committee on best value, and for Police Scotland and ourselves and forensics to be in a good place to be able to do a valid self-assessment and to work with HMICS and Audit Scotland over the next couple of months. That's been invaluable for us being prepared. I just wanted to make that point. And the other point is in terms of the SPA, in terms of the work that Craig Naylor did last year, it has helped, particularly forensics, get prepared going forward as well as ourselves. But the point I'd want to make is we see best value, we see it as integral. Even the recommendations we get from HMICS last year, we just built into our delivery plan. We don't see it as something separate. We see it as continuous improvement. And I'm hoping that will come through when we get assessed this summer as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lynn. Yes, very much so. If the committee played any part at all, we'd be very happy to do so and to continue to support this work. It's very important. Great, thank you. Moving on then to item 4.4, which is to do with accounting policies, judgments and estimates. And we have John and Angelo, I think, on this.
Thanks, Chair. Just myself today on this one, but relatively brief paper. I mean, this is good practice for the committee to consider and approve the accounting policies just in advance of preparing the accounts and finalising them. But really suffice to say there's no substantial changes to our accounting policies and judgments this year. So the paper is as provided, and I'm happy to take any questions you might have.
Thank you, John. No questions from me. Does anyone have any questions? I think the fact that you highlighted very few changes made it easier for us to digest this paper, John. Thank you. Okay, item 4.5 then is the integrated assurance statement, which is a really important annual situation for us. So back to you, John.
Thanks again. And really, like you say, this is the culmination of really all the audit and assurance work over the full year, ultimately to try and inform the opinion for the accountable officer and yourselves for the annual report and accounts. So a few things we've already heard from Claire on the annual review of internal audit, so I won't repeat any of that. But this report brings a spotlight on the first and second line of defences, which we don't always see coming to ARAC, but there's a huge amount of assurance which goes on within Police Scotland and forensics, which is outlined in the report. And in particular, the certificates of assurance within slide 5 of the report. And then James has already spoken to the points on the state's management data earlier on. The overall conclusion that we get in here is similar to internal audit. We can't provide absolute assurance, but we are able to include that there's a reasonable level of assurance across the systems of internal controls for the reasons highlighted within the report. There are plenty of areas for improvement that will be highlighted. However, at the strategic level, we're able to conclude that we can take a reasonable level of assurance on our systems and internal controls. And that's what we're proposing to highlight in our annual report and accounts that will come to you.
Thank you very much, John. Does anyone have any? Yes, Pauline.
Yeah, thanks, John. I just wondered, it's probably a question for James, if we can get an update on the issue that was raised around unsupported financial software and when we might get that resolved. Thanks.
James.
Thanks, Chair. So we're just in the process of finalising an approach. The fundamental issue that we've had is that the existing software provider has been unable to pass the penetration testing that we've done, and we've had 3 goes at it now. And so the conclusion is that that's not going to work and we need to do something else. So we're just finalising a position as to whether or not we purchase a standalone finance system for a relatively short-term period until we get an ERP, or just reviewing the timescales of an ERP. But we need to make a decision over the next week or two, and I've been actively involved in conversations with the change function around how we do that. So one way or another, we'll be moving on it imminently.
Lynn, you wanted to come in?
Yes, just if I may, in terms of change priorities, there are massive programs. I appreciate that. It's, in terms of scale, is not aligned to that, but this is absolutely fundamental to the financial integrity of the authority and Police Scotland and forensics. So in terms of priorities, it has to be at the top of the list, in my view as accountable officer. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, Bex, you wanted to come in there?
Yeah, just to reassure Lynn, it is absolutely, I completely understand that, Lynn. Genuinely, it's disappointing that we're in the position that we're in, but we will move it forward. And Rita, the Transformation Director, has it as #1 priority in terms of working with James to make sure we can come up with something that works and is absolutely the right thing to do. So completely understand that.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else want to come in? I think it's important as well to recognise the work that's done by the other committees of the authority. They're considering a vast number of reports throughout the year that cover some of these issues, and we are able to rely on their work as well. Is there anything else anybody wants to say on this then? No. Thank you very much. Moving on then to item 4.6, which is the SPA Corporate 2024-25 year-end performance report, and that's yourself, Lynn.
Yes, thank you, Chair. There's two aspects to this report. There's the Q4 update on our performance, and then there's the annual for 24-25. In terms of the update in Q4, we set out quite clearly some highlights against each of the outcomes and where we have not delivered some of the milestones, and the intention to carry forward appropriately into 25-26 and move those. In summary, we completed 8% in the year of our delivery targets, and we're carrying forward 11%, and 1% were closed during the year, which is they became not relevant or have been superseded by others. The report itself does set out the highlights, of which there are a number, but for me, again, going back to the earlier comments around best value, this is just part of our way of working now. It's part of continuous improvement. One of the reasons we didn't make progress in some areas was due to resources around staffing, and that's reflected, for example, in the people survey or staff survey that we had in the year, which showed that the issue of resources was a concern for staff, and we have moved over the last few months to recruit into those key posts. So I am very happy with what we have achieved in the time of 24-25. One of the areas was last year as well. Early on in the year, you'll be aware the Scottish Government came out and said quite clearly that they wanted public bodies to constrain their expenditure, and that was around resources and around recruitment. And again, that gives a big picture of where we are. But I think in terms of the resources that we had, staff have done a very good job in delivering, and that we have also our approaches, as you know, the Moscow approach, which is must, could and should do, and that focuses on our delivery. We really focus on things that need delivered. So I'm happy to take any questions, but I am pleased with the outcomes considering the constraints that we had.
Thank you, Lynn. Yes, I think you should be pleased with it. It's very positive. Do we have any questions for Lynn? I suppose we were all aware of the resource constraints you had in the last year. Lynn, do you want to say something about how you dealt with that, how you managed to still deliver at this level with those resource constraints?
Part of it was when we delivered the delivery plan, we moved to the must, could, should, so we focused on what had to be done. We focused on our core functions. So when I was deciding whether any posts could be filled, it always came back to, is this core to what we do, or is it something more discretionary? And that's how we delivered on it, and we brought staff along with that, and they were very, very supportive, to a point where there then becomes, you know, there are strains. So that's how we approached it. We just really focused on what was our priority, what we had to do, and what was our core functions.
Yep, thank you. Angela, your hand was up, did you?
So yeah, you've kind of covered it, Mary. Maybe just thinking on Lynn's response, I wonder in terms of that future forward look, if there's any more that we could support you in doing in terms of workforce planning. I'm just conscious that resources are always going to be an issue, aren't there? And is it thinking about the wider, I mean, you can't ask people to just work harder, but is there something there about the capabilities of the individual team members that might be changed over a period of time to support the changes that you inevitably have to face in the course of a year?
If I might, yes, I'll take that question. First of all, I want to say it's not just staff. We look also at how we work, how we do things, how we use SharePoint, how we, in terms of just how we actually process issues, and we've made improvements and efficiencies where we can. In terms of the staffing side, I've asked, as you're all aware, I will be retiring at the end of September, and I've asked, we're doing a very, very light touch review of where we are in our structure. It's been 5 years since it's been put in place, and there's a very much a detailed, involved piece of work with staff looking at that. This is what we set up. Is this what we need now? So that's linked into that as well as being more efficient in our processes. That should be coming forward, Angela, in the next couple of months, and it will come. It's going to come to a board seminar before the end of September.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think as a snapshot of the performance of the organisation in your last full year with the authority, it's really very positive, and hopefully you're happy to, well, I'm trying, no, I'll not finish the sentence, but it's always good to finish on a high note, and this is definitely that. So thank you very much, Lynn, and thank you to your team for delivering this level of performance against those constraints. So yeah. So item 4.7, if we move on to that, is our committee annual report. John, did you want to say something about this report?
Yep. Thank you, Chair. This is our annual report that we complete against the Scottish Government's Audit Committee Handbook, so making sure that we're discharging all the responsibilities that are set by a Scottish Government for the committee. The main point to highlight, which was flagged last year, was a potential skills gap with the departure of Grant McRae from the authority, but we've been able to fill the key skills that he brought to the committee through Angela and Pauline now. So other than that, there are no issues to highlight, and we were able to talk about this annual report at the Development Day as well.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think Angela and Pauline have more than adequately covered any gaps, so, as we've seen today, apart from anything else. So thank you very much for that. Yes, I'm happy to recognise that we have effectively discharged our role and remit, and that this report is a fair representation of the work of the committee over the last year. Does anybody have any comments or questions? No? Okay. Thank you very much. Of course, we wouldn't have done that without the professional support we've had from Lynn, John and their teams. So thank you very much for that. And our last item of business before we, well, no, we've got another one. We have a report on the evaluation of committee effectiveness. So not our own, but everybody else's committees. And that's Vanessa.
Chair, she's just about to join us.
Oh, okay, okay.
That's okay.
Super. Hello, Vanessa. Your timing was perfect.
Thank you very much. Do you want me just to get started?
Yes, please.
Thanks very much. So members will recall that the committee considered its own committee effectiveness considerations and survey responses at our last meeting, which was held on the 6th of February, sorry. The report before members today is actually a collection of the overall outputs that cover all of the committee's effectiveness considerations. In summary, the overall feedback was very positive, and we have identified some learning for each of the individual committees, which has been taken away and considered at individual committee meetings, development days, and at members' seminars. All committees were content to consider and sign off on their assurance reporting, and yes, that's all been very positive. The only other thing I would add is that we had enhanced the committee effectiveness process this year and invited the feedback of our stakeholders. That was positive again and has provided additional insights and information that is helping committees themselves to take forward some feedback. We didn't get a great deal of feedback of all the stakeholders, which I've outlined in the report. Only 3 did come back to us, but some considered feedback on various committees. So the report is before members. I won't elaborate any further, but if you have any questions, I would be very happy to take them.
Thank you very much, Vanessa. It's been a really interesting exercise, and the first time we've involved stakeholders, so a slow start on that, but I'm sure we'll build that up as we go forward. Does anyone have any comments or questions on this report? We've all seen the reports as we've been sitting in other committees, so it's not new to us, but it's good to see the positive nature of this work. Angela.
So thank you, and it is good to see it like this, and I think we should take encouragement from the overview and again demonstrate that we're a learning part of the organisation. I suppose, Vanessa, it's how we support the team in progressing these and making sure that we don't lose sight of them. How will the actions, how will the areas be reported back to whichever committees, or where will it be reported back to?
Thanks, Angela. So I have sat in a couple of the development sessions that have taken place for each of the committees. I should have also just outlined that all the committee effectiveness discussions took place in public sessions of each of the committee meetings this year, and members were encouraged to have that free and frank conversation involving stakeholders there. So some of the information and the conversation took place at those committee meetings. Some of it has taken place in terms of adding to the work plans. Reviews of board and committee templates is a piece of work that we are already initiated, and the purpose of that is to provide better guidance to stakeholders and report authors on what non-executive members require to see. That work has already started, and we expect it to conclude about August time. Other things that came through was just the length of reports and the detail that's contained in it, or for example, the guidance that is provided to members and report authors. The other thing that did come through, Angela, was specific potentially to Resources Committee rather than any other committee, was just the ability to track the benefits of proposals and to report back on them. So it has been added to the work plans of each of the committees, and it is for committee chairs and members as well as officials to support them not to lose sight of that.
Great, thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeah, so we'll look forward to a similar set of reports next year, Vanessa, and thank you for this one. So our final item then before we look at a couple of issues in private would be the Audit, Risk and Assurance Committee work plan. So item 5, we're familiar with this now, obviously a live document that is continually updated by Karen. This is obviously always our busiest meeting of the year. We have so many issues that have to be dealt with at the year end, but we have a full agenda for the coming next few meetings as well. So any comments, questions, anything? No, simply note this one then. Everyone, thank you very much. Now that brings an end to the public